Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Abuja, Nigeria here. Welcome to the W2A Wheat Development and Trade Webinar Series. My name is Samaila. I lead communications at Welcome to Africa International. So we'll be beginning this webinar shortly. Of course, we've started already. So, to gauge performance and our excitement, if you are with us here, I'd like you to drop some emojis or just raise your hand or share thumbs up to let us see your excitement about the webinar that is about to begin. Thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. It promises to be quite inciting and eventful. So while we do that, we have no intention to keep people for longer than an hour. So we'll just dive straight into the webinar proper. Okay, so like I said again, my name is Samaila. So as a form of brief introduction, Welcome to Africa International is a trade and investment facilitation company. We are based in Abuja and London, United Kingdom. So what we have been doing is doing programs and using different resources to facilitate trade and investment into Nigeria's agriculture and maritime sectors. Hopefully next year we'll expand into more sectors like the renewable energy and mining next year by God's grace. So once again, you're welcome to the webinar. And I also have with me, before I introduce our speakers, I also have with me my co-host and moderator, in person of Emmanuel. Please, Mr. Emmanuel, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Thank you, Simi, for the warm introduction.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Emmanuel. Emmanuel is an investment and trade analyst at Welcome to Africa International. So I have some expert speakers with us here, and I will be starting by introducing them in earnest. Okay, thank you very much. So our speakers for today are Dr. Aliyu. I can't see Dr. Okay, still in the meeting with us. Good. All right. So our speakers for today are amiable Dr. Kellye Eversole. She's the executive director of the International with Genome Sequencing Consortium and the president of Eversole Associates. She has more than 2 decades of experience in research, and surprisingly, she has more than 10,000 citations. She's indeed a figure we reckon with in the wheat development sector globally. So welcome, Dr. Kellye.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we also have with us here the presence of Dr. Kevin Pixley. Is the Director of Genetic Resources Program at the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, CIMMYT. where he helps formulate, facilitate, and oversee interdisciplinary strategies to enhance the relevance and impact of wheat and maize research. Interestingly, Dr. Kevin is currently in Dakar, Senegal, where he's hearing a lot of bonjour, bonjour. And so he's in Africa with us here. And I'm sure he's enjoying our very warm climate. I'm sure he's enjoying the sunlight here in Africa. So welcome, Dr. Kevin. I'm waiting to have our last speaker, Dr. Aliyu Samaila, to start this video. Okay, yeah, he's with us now. Okay. All right. So we also have Dr. Aliyu Samaila. He has over 25 years of direct involvement in agriculture and agribusiness. He's currently the head of value chain development at Flour Mills, Nigeria. Flour Mills is one of the biggest agro-allied companies in the whole of West Africa and even arguably the whole of Africa. And Dr. Aliyu has served in several notable roles, including senior program manager for United States USAID markets from 2009 to 2013. He also occupied the position of Director of Agricultural Productivity at CNFA, and several other projects where Dr. Aliyu has contributed to the development of the wheat value chain in Nigeria and by extension the whole of Africa. So we have real big guns with us here, and it's a promising event. So we'd like to kickstart the session immediately. But before that, I would like to just hear briefly from Dr. Aliyu. Dr. Aliyu, please.
Good afternoon and welcome, everyone.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, Dr. Kevin, can I hear you?
Yes, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right. Welcome, Dr. Kevin. And Kellye?
Yes, thank you very much. It's an honor to be.
All right. Okay, we also have here with us our Chief Executive Officer and founder at Welcome to Africa International, in person of Ms. Bamidele Shemowola. She's joining us, and I don't know if she's available to speak now. All right. Okay, so joining us on the panel session is Francis Nwalibe. Is our investment and trade lead at Welcome to Africa International. So we'll be starting. Francis, can we hear you?
Of course. I can hear you clearly. It's really nice to have everyone here. And I believe I'm surrounded by doctors, so I will just add doctor to my name as well. Dr. Francis Nwalibe, really nice to have you all here. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Francis Nwalibe. I'm the only one who's not a doctor yet here. So we'll dive into this session. So we'll be having the first presentation from, okay, yeah, our moderator will take the floor from here. Mr. Emmanuel.
Thank you very much, Simi, for the introduction. I think he brought an impressive line of speakers today, and I think it's going to be a very engaging discussion. So my name is Emmanuel, and I'll be moderating this webinar. So I would truly like to commend everyone for taking their time to join from their various locations, as it's going to be a very engaging webinar, and it promises to address some of the challenges and the opportunities that Nigerian wheat value chain presents. So we'll be diving into the webinar properly. So I'll just explain the structure of the webinar. So we are going to be having 2 presentations, of which after the presentation we'll be taking Q&A, question and answer from all the speakers. So all the speakers will be asked the questions, and then you will answer. Then if you have any question for the speaker, you can utilize the chat box to write your question, and our communications team will tend to them promptly. So and after that, we'll be having question and answer from the attendees, then we'll conclude. So without further ado, I'll be diving into the agenda for today. And the first presentation will give us better insights on the importance of wheat to Nigeria and the opportunity of using genomics to enhance breeding. So Kellye Eversole will be taking this presentation. At this juncture, I'll be handing over to Kellye to take it over from here.
Thank you very much. I don't think I can share my screen. Yes, I can. There we go. I could not first, So thank you very much for this opportunity to be here today. I think it's really a great webinar series, and I commend Wheat to Africa, or Welcome to Africa. Of course, I said Wheat to Africa because that's the way I think, but I commend them for everything that you're trying to do to increase development and trade within Africa, and in particular today in Nigeria. So I'm going to talk very briefly about wheat in Nigeria and maybe the opportunities for genomics. Before I do that, just to let you know about the International Wheat Genome Sequencing Consortium, we have more than almost 3,500 members in 900 and over 900 institutes and companies. And we have members and people involved with the IWGSC in 76 countries. We also have 8 sponsors, which make it possible for us to do anything and to try to accelerate the development of a wheat genomics foundation. So wheat, I think, there's no question that it's a key food security crop for Nigeria. And one of the main aspects of this is there's 24.8 million people who are food insecure. And part of this is because production has decreased and is as a result of high input costs. You can't get high quality seeds, insecurity, of course, in the north and the major wheat regions, the stem borer infestation, which has impacted wheat production. Also, the challenge of trying to sow wheat in very hot and dry conditions, and overall productivity, although the yield basically has increased, it's still 50% below the world average. And because of all that, we also see a 50% lack of being able to fill the wheat milling capacity in Nigeria. So it's about 50% below its full capacity. Prices at the same time have increased dramatically, which makes food inflation as of April of this year, it's increased by 24.6%. The cost of wheat flour is up by 12%, and bread was up by 15% as of between the period of January to June, and bread prices are expected to increase another 15% by the end of 2023. And even though wheat right now is really placed number 3 within the utilization of crops in Nigeria, there is an increased demand for bread and bread products by the Nigerian population. And so what is really the path forward that I see? And one is improved technologies, agronomic practices, utilization of fertilizer and pesticides, but it also includes higher quality seeds that are adapted to Nigeria's growing conditions. And part of that would be stem borer resistant varieties and a genomics enabled breeding pipeline. So wheat breeding is and wheat improvement generally is extremely complex because you have to do all of these things at exactly the same time. So you have to increase yield, adapt to climate change, achieve durable resistance to abiotic and biotic stresses, and maintain consistent quality and yield, provide for sustainability, and meet the contextual situation. In the case of Nigeria, meet the differences in the different regions for producing wheat in Nigeria, and at the same time prepare for the next challenge, because it takes a long time to develop a variety and put it in the field. In many cases, if you look at the averages, it can take anywhere up to 12 to 15 years to develop a new variety. So by the time you figure out what you need to develop, you have another challenge. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is can genomics help us lower the time that it takes for us to develop varieties? And so part of that is getting to a genomics assisted breeding. And there's a great publication that was published by Rajiv Varshney and his colleagues a couple of years ago that really laid out what the strategy kind of is, where we take everything from a gene bank to bridging to developing the sequencing. And number B, if you look at the category here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but B is really where the IWGSC comes in, and then you want to functionally validate what we've developed, and then develop a haplotype based breeding, and leading to genome-wide prediction, which I'm sure you'll hear more from Dr. Pixley, who is really the expert in that aspect. And so we have within the IWGSC really focused on, what can we do from the sequence, this category B and C, bridging genotype and phenotype gap. And after we published the reference sequence of the wheat genome in 2018, then we began looking at what was next and what we needed to do next. And the overall vision that we have is to enhance breeding through an increased understanding of the molecular basis of traits and their allelic diversity. And to that point, and again, linking it to the pictograph I had earlier, is to develop reference sequences with high quality functional annotations, integrated databases, our wheat pangenome, and then connecting all of that with the international community. So the major focus that we are on right now is to develop a wheat pangenome that really represents the worldwide, the breadth of the worldwide diversity of wheat, and based on land races and the origin of wheat. And we have just received news that the National Science Foundation is funding the development of this project. And so we are literally yesterday, we just had the news. So we haven't even made an official announcement yet, but we will be addressing the need to preserve and discover and mobilize genetic resources. And we're taking 8 land races, plus our reference variety, which is Chinese Spring, and sequencing them to extremely high quality, and then developing a practical haplotype graph that will use these accessions, both the 9 accessions from the NSF project, plus additional accessions from 2 groups in France. And this will kind of lay a foundation and allow people in other areas, including in Nigeria, to then use the practical haplotype graph and understand their own varieties. And so this is just kind of a pictogram of the entire project. And I believe we have on today are the gentleman who will be the primary project lead on this project, Joshua Stein. And so if you get down into the nitty gritty, I might pull him in if you ask me specific questions about the project. But the main purpose is to really pull into the our information about the entire genetic diversity of wheat, and then use that information to identify key traits that we want to put into new varieties that will increase resistance to diseases and to abiotic and biotic stresses. So when we, just 1 second, for wheat genomics in Nigeria, then, as I mentioned a moment earlier, a path forward is all these improved technologies, and the bottom was the genomics-enabled breeding pipeline. And as I see it, I think what is absolutely critical is to develop a genomics pipeline in Nigeria. And to do that, you need to have infrastructure that enables genomics-assisted breeding. You need to sequence Nigerian wheat varieties and then utilize the IWGSE practical haplotype graph to represent variability in those Nigerian varieties. You need to identify key traits and other germplasm for integration into your varieties and start enabling for rapid adaptation to changing climates. This is a really fast overview given the time. I know we're crunched for time, but please get in touch with any of us, and we will be making this slide deck available to the organizers. And I do want to make a last pitch. We've just published, in fact, I received it yesterday. Yesterday was obviously Wheat Genome Day for me, but we have the first comprehensive book about the wheat genome, and it is available in open access, so anyone can see a copy of it. So thank you very much for listening, and I appreciate the time that I've had today, and would be glad to answer questions now or during the Q&A.
All right, thank you very much, Kellye, for this insightful presentation. I think it's about how you go using genomics to boost wheat production. Next, we will be taking another presentation from Dr. Kevin, which will address how Nigeria can replicate what Ethiopia is doing to boost their wheat production. So at this juncture, I will be leaving the floor to Dr. Kelvin Pixley to give his presentation on improving wheat production in Nigeria and drawing valuable insights from Ethiopia. Over to you, Dr. Kelvin.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you just confirm you see my screen properly? Hello, can you see my screen properly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, thank you for the invitation to participate in this webinar. It's been a great introduction actually from Kellye, and that will help me explain, maybe even answer one of the questions that appeared in the chat, is how does the genomic data actually help or serve the work in Nigeria. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do at CIMMYT. My current role actually is director of CIMMYT's wheat program, and so I'm very much involved in these activities. In fact, last week I was in Abuja participating in a WECA wheat special summit, talking about the opportunities for wheat in Nigeria, and there was participation also from the Millers Association at that meeting. So great to see some of you also on this call. Let me now share with you just a few slides. First of all, I think you all realize that the production of wheat has been increasing tremendously, quite a nice rate of increase. That's the red line on the left graph. And yet the area harvested has not increased over the last 5 decades or so, which of course translates into increased productivity or higher yields. And on the graph on the right-hand side, you can see this broken down into approximately decades. And what you see is that about 1 to almost 3% increase in yield has happened over every decade, which is tremendous rate of progress. And this happens because we have very sophisticated breeding programs. And part of that is genomics, but I won't go through all the details and this is really a schematic of the breeding program at CIMMYT, much of which is implemented with partners in countries around the world. But it includes very much pathology, which includes rusts and other pathogens. And in countries, well, in all countries, the pathology is important because particularly with climate change, we see changing spectra of diseases that are prevalent or changing races of pathogens that need to be continually bred in the wheat varieties to overcome or to have resistance to those pathogens. The molecular lab is an intricate part. I'll show you a little bit more about that, using genomic tools to facilitate and accelerate our breeding programs. Physiology is particularly important. I'll give you one example how for Nigeria, physiology may be the key to heat tolerance as the temperatures continue to increase and are already near the margins of the suitable weather for growing wheat. Wide crosses, sometimes we have to use wild relatives or exotic germplasm to find the diversity needed to improve the varieties for environments such as Nigeria. Biometrics and quantitative genetics are important. I'll tell you a little bit about the international nurseries and the germplasm that we distribute globally, including to partners in Nigeria. And then, of course, quality would be the last one. I have one slide to tell you about the impacts of heat and climate on the quality, which affects, of course, the processing and the bread making, the pasta making, etc. So this slide is just really meant to give you an idea. I'm not going to go through all of these small, let's say, abbreviated numbers are specific genes or alleles for resistance to different diseases, stem rust or yellow rust or fusarium head blotch. And these are markers, molecular markers that we use in our selection to improve varieties of wheat for resistance to these particular traits. We also have markers for drought and heat and other mutants that affect quality components, etc. And this is all something thanks to genomics, thanks to gene sequences or genetic sequences, we are able to develop molecular markers that accelerate our breeding. And this cool picture down on the right bottom with the kind of reddish lights is speed breeding. Kellye alluded to speed breeding. This special lighting system and temperature control allows us to get 4 or even almost 5 generations within a 12-month period. So very rapid progress from seed to seed, and it allows us to accelerate our breeding programs. We have a very extensive network. Each one of these color spots on this map indicates one location or a country where there's a location that collaborates internationally to evaluate wheat germplasm for different diseases in this case. And of course, Nigeria would be very welcome to join these networks and to participate in sending germplasm for evaluation to relevant diseases, or perhaps also participating in evaluating international germplasm for resistance to important diseases. One thing we do, and you can see the many, many envelopes up here on the right-hand corner, is we distribute from CIMMYT many nurseries, we call them, or trials, you might think of them as trials, of wheat materials for evaluation and use by collaborators around the world. And you can see in 1 year, we sent to more than 300 collaborators in more than 70 countries, more than 2,000 sets, each set having from a few to dozens of different genetic materials that could be of use as a primary source in breeding programs, but also as potential new varieties. Now, the one slide I'd like to share with you about physiology and temperature, because it's very likely that high temperatures will be the greatest biological or biophysical constraint to wheat production in Nigeria. And what this graph illustrates is the importance of nighttime temperature, because really the biggest, or one of the biggest losses to yield potential happens at night, when the plant has to respire or burn energy in order to stay functional during those higher and higher temperatures. So the hotter it is, the more it has to respire to maintain itself physically and or physiologically alive and active. And what we see here is across these 4 decades or so, there has been a range at this particular location in Mexico of temperatures of more than 4 degrees Celsius in terms of the average minimum temperature. So to the right, these are hotter temperatures, 4.4 degrees hotter than on the left. And we see that the average yield, this blue line of wheat varieties, goes down. The hotter it gets at night, the lower the yield, or there's a direct relationship between yield going down with higher temperatures. This red line at the top represents one genotype or one variety that we identified that seems to defy this trend. It has a tremendous advantage over the average in terms of its ability to tolerate these higher nighttime temperatures. And these are the types of genotypes that we need to look for. So on this next slide, it's almost the same thing, but a more genetic explanation. You can see on the figure on the left, an elite line, and then on the right, the exotic one that had this ability to tolerate higher nighttime temperatures. And you see that under high yield potential, they yield about the same. So this middle bar is the average the average grain yield. It's about the same for the unimproved elite and for the exotic one with heat tolerance. But then the graph on the right shows us that under heat stress, this red individual was able to perform much better than the elite line, which could be a released variety, indicating that this is one we really want to select and could be useful for environments such as Nigeria. The graph on the right illustrates almost the same thing. The line for B2, a hypothetical variety called G3, shows a very steep decline in performance as the temperatures increase, whereas B1 and B2 are examples of those, G1 and G2 are examples of varieties that could tolerate. And we're actually using what we call artificial intelligence or deep learning to look at the genomic sequences. So using genomic sequences, such as described by Kellye, we can interrogate those sequences together with data from the field and try to identify which areas in the genome are resulting in this characteristic of heat tolerance, and hopefully be able to use these in genomics-assisted breeding programs. I promised you one slide on what happens to quality. You can't see it, it's hiding at least on my screen up here at the top, but this is wheat quality under drought and under heat. There's some surprises here even for me. I'm not an expert in quality aspects, but you can see that with drought and heat, grain quality in general declines. Milling quality tends to decline. Protein content seems to increase, but it's kind of an artifact because protein content is more, mainly because total yield is less and there's less carbohydrate, so the protein proportion is greater. Gluten strength is affected differently by drought and heat, as is the dough extensibility. The ability to make a good loaf of bread is actually improved by heat and decreases with drought. And bread making quality in general, you see, is also affected. So we do need to consider the effects of climate and climate change on the quality of the products that we're going to make. Now, just my last couple of slides are about Ethiopia, because I think it's a very pertinent example for Nigeria. Ethiopia in the last 10 years or so has invested very heavily, a very strong policy environment to increase wheat production and productivity. You can see the results of that effort since the mid-90s. You can see production has been increasing tremendously from about 10 million tons to now almost 60 million tons in 2020. You can see the yield line going up, whereas the area is also increasing, but not as much as the yield has been increasing. Tremendous gains, and I want to give you some ideas of how that has happened. One of it is really through a focus on making improved seed or seed of improved varieties available, widely available. This has happened through a series of different mechanisms. Formal seed sector, so that has the large companies producing and marketing seed. intermediate. These are farmer seed producer associations, and even informal systems where communities come together to produce seed of improved varieties. And of course, the base seed for these companies or groups to work with comes from the public sector, such as CIMMYT or the national program in each of the, well, in this case, in Ethiopia. There's been tremendous capacity development, both physical in terms of equipment, machinery to mechanize wheat production. That will be crucial in Ethiopia. If you're going to increase productivity and production, it will have to be mechanized by necessity. It may be large-scale equipment or it might be small-scale equipment, but you will need adequate mechanization, and there has to be all sorts of human capacity development. I shouldn't neglect to mention agronomic and ecological sustainability. As we increase production in Ethiopia, we must be extremely careful to do this in a sustainable way. We want to do it for decades and even centuries to come, and not compromise the environment through short-term objectives of gains in productivity. My last slide, I think it's my last slide. We have a whole number of local partners. I was asked to talk about how you might become involved. You can maybe find yourself on this column on the left. And then we have many international partners also participating in Ethiopia. All of these partners have been critical to the success in Ethiopia, or at least the success to date, and would be important players in Nigeria. So with that, I want to thank you once again and hand it back over to the moderators.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelvin, for this insightful presentation. I think I have a question, but I'll save it for the Q&A, for the general question and answer. So right now we'll be jumping into the question and answer for every speaker. And we'll be starting up with Dr. Aliyu. So I know Dr. Aliyu is the head of Value Chain Development and Farmers of Nigeria. And I would just like to ask, what are the sustainable strategies, especially regarding supply chain management, that benefits smallholder farmers in terms of productivity, resources utilization, and sustainable agricultural practices? So over to you, Dr. Aliyu.
Well, that is too many questions in one. And good to see Kevin back. I met you at Workawit last week. Good to see you back. Hope you return home safely. For us, a brief background, we are the major end users of anything wheat in the country, but we picked the gauntlet and spearheaded the stimulation of local wheat production in the country through the Flour Milling Association of Nigeria, which is a consortium of the flour mills in the country, led by the Flour Mills of Nigeria, just to show what can be done and the opportunities therein for wheat cultivation in Nigeria. And thankfully, this is the third year. Thankfully, it is gaining a lot of traction, and we are seeing government is key interested in joining the fray. And just recently, precisely last Saturday, the minister launched the dry season wheat production for the country. But for us, it's going to be a continuous thing, and I'm happy to say we are partnering with both CIMMYT and ICADA. In fact, just this morning, we completed the planting in our own research farm, about 11 lines that we collected from CIMMYT. It's a year in, year out thing. We get material, which we test, and once it performs well, we take it further by involving the Lake Chad Research Institute, which is the local institute that is saddled with the responsibility of everything wheat in the country. So I'm surprised the organizers didn't invite Lake Chad Research Institute, because they will have been at home with both Kellye and Kevin. I am a private sector person, and I can only talk on what we are doing in the private sector. But from what Kellye and Kevin mentioned, it's more of our Lake Chad Institute thing. and we will be the major beneficiaries of the outcome of whatever they come. But be that as it may, I can just let you know that yes, wheat production in Nigeria is not totally new. It has been around for centuries, almost 2-3 centuries through the trans-Saharan trade. But what has been new is commercial wheat production. If you need wheat in millions of metric tons, how do you find it? You certainly don't get it with farmers getting 800 kg per hectare. And that is the issue we are trying to address by, one, getting the genomics right, by getting the right heat tolerant, as Kevin rightly mentioned, because heat, more than drought, because it is grown in the dry season, so we provide irrigation. So our major challenge is the heat. We have some heat tolerant varieties which were adopted from CIMMYT and some from ICADA and have been localized here. For now, there are about 17 of them, but for us, the millers, we promote about 4. I see someone asking of the names of the varieties. There are Neloki, Imam, Bolog, and Norman. Then in the pasta section, we have Barayoka and one other that I can't quickly recall now, but they are there. And all you need to do is to go to either the National Seed Council or contact the Lake Chad Research Institute. There are so many others that we haven't adopted. They announced at Weka Wheat that they have about 17 varieties they have released. So it's there, it has been ongoing. What is happening now, to answer your question, is the scaling up. We started with just about 700 hectares. This year, we are growing about 8,000 hectares, 7,000 of the outgrowers, 1,000 hectares of seed, because everything we do has to go concurrently with seed production. As the 2 speakers rightly mentioned, if you don't develop a reliable seed system, you are bound to fail, because the seed system stable and reliable is key to whatever is going to happen in terms of upscaling thing. And the seed system, it doesn't only happen with existing seeds. No, research R&D must continue with developing newer lines, nearly varieties that will expand the scope for the system to endure. So it's a continuous thing, and it's going on year in, year out, and it's thankfully we are heading there, because for now we are averaging about 2.5 metric tons per hectare. It's not the best yet, but we are having isolated cases of up to 6 to 7 tons per hectare, which means there is room for improvement. And with time, we are getting there. It's going to be a long journey, considering the quantum of volume we intend to substitute. But the most important thing is we have started that journey, and we're on track, and we'll remain on track to make sure that it happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aliyu, for this wonderful answer. So I think I'll be moving to the next speaker in the person of Ms. Bamidele Shimu, who is being represented by our Igbo Investment and Trade Lead, Francis Nwalibe. So the question goes, as an investment and trade facilitation organization, what innovative financing models are practicable and adaptable for developing wheat value chain, and what role do you think the private sector can play in this, Francis?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Emmanuel. And yes, I'm sure you're expecting to see Ms. Bamidele on the line, but we have some pre-scheduled engagements, and I'm representing her for this panel session. So really well said from all the speakers with regards how we can boost production. And I really like the aspects where you touched upon genomics, right? It's an area that is gaining a lot of steam as we speak. And then it's to be good for us to scale up the progress that I've been seeing in Ethiopia, in Nigeria as well. So for me particularly, I'm going to come from a private sector standpoint. So you are not alone, Dr. Aliyu. I'm also here representing the private sector. So what I'm typically going to come out from is regards how we can finance wheat, right? Which is the question you asked. So overall in agriculture, what you notice is agriculture is a sort of peculiar sector. It's not your brick and mortar sector where, for example, you put in garbage in and then it comes out garbage out, right? So typically, right, with regards wheat, so wheat is a very peculiar crop as well. 45% of what an individual consumes on a daily in Nigeria, is made up from wheat, from your bread, your biscuits, and the likes. So it's a very, very important staple crop. And then with regards to financing, any operations. So what you will notice is when you segment the value chain actors in this particular value chain, you will discover that once you segment them, we have the producers on one end, we have the input suppliers on another end, and then we also have the aggregators as well, and then down to the processors. And then the producers, a bulk of them is being comprised by smallholder farmers. So that invariably tells you that a lot of the wheat that's being produced is by smallholder farmers. So what does that tell you? So typically, if you're financing an operation, right, for wheat production, the target beneficiaries, it's going to be the smallholder farmers because they're going to be the first touch points before you move it across the value chain down to the processors, right? So, and wheat is another particular crop I like to say that, there's a dire need for 100% value addition. Being, you can't consume wheat in its raw form. You can't eat wheat, for example, like tomato when you pluck, where you can have tomato being sold fresh, or you have other fruits where you can sell at their current states. So for wheat, you have to actually process them, right? For you to be able to now have them into flour, where you now sell to, the other end users as well. So that tells you that it's quite capital intensive. And if you look at the wheat value chain, you discover that it's sort of fragmented, right? Where you have few players in the value chain. So wheat is one commodity. I like to see that someone can just wake up one day and say, look, I want to start farming wheat, or I want to be a wheat processor. Wheat is actually quite capital intensive, right? So there's a need for you to be able to have suitable financing for you to be able to run through the operations. So with regards to this specific commodity, how we recommend financing it is going beyond the conventional financing, where you have a conventional equity financing or debt financing. What we are saying is, for this particular value chain, we believe the innovative financing solution that can be adopted here is the blended finance mechanism. I'm quite sure most have heard of blended finance mechanism quite a few times, but then I'd just like to throw more light into what it entails. So for blended finance typically means it's a form of structured financing where you have on one end the philanthropic organizations, and then you have on another end the private institutions, right? So what's typically blended financing does is you have two individuals with different objectives, right? And then different perspectives. So you blend them together to invest in the same particular opportunity whilst taking into consideration their respective objectives, right? And so this part of or this type of financing is of four archetypes. So on the first leg, we have what we call the concessional capital, right? That's the first form of blended finance. We also have guarantee or risk insurance. We also have TA facility, and then we have a design grants. So these are four kind of archetypes you can adopt for the blended finance structure. So what is concessional capital? So concessional capital can also be known as first loss, where what you have, the instruments being deployed here are commercial debts and equity, right? Where you have philanthropic investors provide funds on below market terms, with a capital structure to lower the overall cost of capital and provide an additional layer of protection to private investors. So typically for the concessional capital, you have on one end your donor agency, and you have on that end, say, your commercial bank, for example, or say an asset or a fund manager, where they come together. And then the donor agency sort of provides a layer of protection to the capital of the private investor, right? So that is for the concessional capital of first loss. And then we have guarantee and risk insurance. where the instruments being deployed here are debt and equity, right? So for guarantee or risk insurance, where what you have is you have philanthropic investors provide credit enhancements through guarantees or insurance on below market terms. So typically what we are trying to say, for example, is you have your flour mills, for example, on one end, say they want to increase the yield per hectare of their primary production, right? Existing, say, for example, in Gombe State. What they can typically do is you can have a donor agency come on one front and saying that, okay, we understand that you have this current yield per hectare and you plan on scaling this up to a certain amount. So what we're saying is we can produce some sort of insurance or risk insurance whereby if these farmers, for example, produce below the estimated yield per hectare, you are still covered all the same. So that's also some form of structure that can also be used to incentivize private sector participation. And then the third one we have is the TA facility. So technically, right, for example, TA facility is more like a damper, right, where you have a conventional financing model, and then you have a technical assistance facility to damp the existing model. So TA facilities usually come in the form of grants, and then they can be utilized pre-investment or post-investment to strengthen the commercial viability. So invariably, you have a conventional transaction. Let's say, for example, I would also like to use flour mills in this case. Say they want to finance an operation or production of wheat of, say, maybe 10,000 hectares, for example, 20,000 hectares. And then, of course, maybe they were able to structure the transaction from maybe a commercial bank. What they can do, for example, is they can reach out to a philanthropic organization, be it a donor or if some foundation, and then they provide some sort of grants to cushion the effects, the downside effects of that specific transaction. Right, that's also another model that can be adopted as well. And the last but not the least, we have the design grants. So typically what this model sort of, the instruments in this model is still debt and equity, where, for example, some sort of grant funding is being released to develop or to set up a particular program, right? And then I would just like to give also a clear case of a particular program that's actually existing, where we have a donor agency, for example, incentivizing private sector participation, right? So I would like to use a clear case of the Feed the Future rural resilience activity. I'm quite sure some of us are familiar with that, being implemented by Mercy Corps in collaboration with IFDC and Save the Children International, where they have a fund, the Enterprise Investment Fund, which has the sole aim of mobilizing, de-risking, and incentivizing private sector investments. So overall, their overall aim is to cushion the effects of both the increase in fuel, food, and fertilizers on farmers' productivity, and then overall to strengthen the wheat value chain. So typically what they are doing, for example, is say a bank wants to give a loan, for example, in a clear case to a smallholder farmer, right? So typically they'll work with outgrowers, for example, I'm giving an example, or outgrowers, or say aggregators, for example, right? And then for you to work, let's say you want to give loans to the farmers, they help cushion the effects of, say, the downside protection, the downside risks through that specific fund, right? So these are just some of the examples of how the private sector can participate. So from what I have mentioned, you notice that it's a hands-on approach, right? It's not just on one end where you have, say, a private sector, a private individual trying to finance production in the wheat value chain. There needs to be participation and inclusiveness from all value chain actors. That's what I believe. I hope I made a lot of sense.
Thank you very much, Francis, for better insights on the different innovative financing models that are practicable for developing the wheat value chain in Nigeria. So the next set of questions go to Kellye Eversole. So Kellye, considering the diversity of wheat varieties and environmental conditions across Africa, including Nigeria, how does the International Wheat Genome Sequencing Consortium plan to tailor its efforts to support the development of wheat varieties that are well adapted to the unique agroecology context and challenges faced by farmers in the African continent?
Thank you very much for that question. As I mentioned, we have a wheat diversity project that we have just been funded to launch. it will form a foundation or a baseline from which you can actually take, we could then sequence Nigerian varieties and then compare them on our haplotype graph and actually determine what variation and what variability exists. I mean, for example, Dr. Aliyu mentioned the specific varieties that they look at right now and what the millers are looking for. Well, what are those traits and how do we then integrate those traits into other varieties? And it's really, you know, bringing in that diversity that exists already in Nigeria, but then also, you know, as has been said, wheat is not new to Nigeria. So you've developed some varieties that work very well already. And so having your own scientist and your own pipeline within Nigeria that actually can start analyzing these data and utilizing some of the tools that we are developing at the international level will be critical. And what I will say is that sequencing a genome and determining its functional annotation of specific regions of the genome is only the first step. You know, it's just a foundation. What you would then have to do is to have the breeding components coming in. And that's really where Dr. Pixley mentioned earlier. It's, you know, it really takes both. You can't just pick one aspect. You can't just sequence a bunch of varieties and then not do anything with them. And, you know, we've seen there's a lot of efforts that get underway to say, okay, let's just sequence everything out there in the world. Well, if you're not doing anything with the sequences, there's no way to actually bring value to them. And I think what we try to do is really focus on what are those downstream needs? What are the needs of the users for different varieties? And even in picking the varieties we wanted to develop for our wheat diversity project, we really looked at all of the germplasm internationally and picked, you know, there are a number of different regions that we can get the best representation of germplasm diversity. And one of the things that's interesting is about 40% of what's in the land races is not in the elite lines that are being bred. So we're missing out on integrating that diversity into wheat. And I'm sure that's probably the case in Nigeria if we took some of the Nigerian lines. So, you know, we would actually propose that you begin to develop that infrastructure within Nigeria, learn how to use genome sequences, how to learn how to clone genes, how to then put those genes into new varieties. And I think that infrastructure is absolutely critical. You can't rely on, you cannot just simply rely on the rest of the world to tell you which variety. In fact, that doesn't work. You're the ones who know your own climate, your own particular aspects. And I think that will be critically important for your future if you really want to build a pipeline that can start being responsive to the changing conditions within Nigeria. And, you know, one of the questions that we saw briefly was, you know, can you grow wheat in the South? Why not? Why not? You know, yes, you've got cooler regions in the North and that works better, but what about developing varieties that would be suited for the South? And I think that's something that you can do with genomics over time. But I think you also have to bear in mind quality. Quality is a critical component long-term. And you have to, when we think about economic development, we have to have varieties that are developing on a constant basis. And I can't reinforce that wheel, that little mouse in that wheel enough. You're constantly having to change and adapt and evolve, and that's the only way to stay ahead of the game. And we need to make sure from an economic development standpoint that our farmers have sufficient capital, they have the right amount of seeds, they know the right technologies to use for management practices, and that our mills within Nigeria are at full capacity. That's one of the ways you bring that longer term economic development.
Thank you very much, Kellye, for the beautiful answer. So I think you just touched upon the question I'm about to ask Dr. Kelvin, but nevertheless, Dr. Kelvin, I would like to hear your thoughts. So the question goes, what do you think are the most important areas that require investment in Nigeria? Given your understanding of wheat development in Nigeria, so I would just like to pick your thoughts. What do you think are the most important areas that require investment in Nigeria, but as it relates to wheat?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And probably I'm not the best to answer that question, even though I will try anyway, at the risk of saying something silly, because I don't live in Nigeria, I haven't worked in Nigeria, and so really you have local expertise. You mentioned Lake Chad Research Institute, Dr. Turaki, Dr. Mariam Dawood. I mean, they are experts, and they could probably give you a better answer. But clearly there are some issues that jump to mind, and that is looking at the cropping systems within which wheat is grown, whether it's after rice or if it's a system that involves a leguminous crop, and ensuring that these cropping systems actually enhance the soil fertility and the long-term soil status, quality status in those areas. To me, would be one of the biggest concerns and opportunities that the wheat and community needs to be thinking about. One of the biggest issues is low soil organic matter content, and making sure that whatever cropping system is promoted and is used by farmers does not deteriorate, but preferably actually improves the soil quality, so that you have a sustainable system that can carry you and feed you through the next decades and centuries. So if I were to pick one, that would be one, and then maybe another one would be ensuring adequate mechanization so that farmers can actually scale their production and be able to profitably produce it without intense labor requirements to produce the crop. Clearly, there are many issues that need attention, but these are at least two that come to mind very quickly.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I will still be asking Dr. Aliyu the same question. So, Dr. Aliyu, over to you. What are the most important areas that require investment as it relates to wheat in Nigeria?
Well, if you may ask me, every area requires investment in terms of, we are starting, as the scientists say, tabula rasa, on a clean slate. But as I said, we are moving in the right direction. So you need investment in mechanization, you need investment in the agronomy, you need investment in every other thing, the seed sector. Every sector along the value chain requires investment. With so many things are going on all at once, like to add to what Kellye said, just last September, the Lake Chad Research Institute invited us to screen some of material they are testing for wet season production, which means trying to expand the scope. And about out of the 16, 17 materials that were tested, 3 looked promising, and they are going to reevaluate them and take it further. So this R&D requires heavy investment. The seed sector requires heavy investment. So many other things that you can't put your finger on one thing and say this is what requires investment. The entire value chain requires investment, because it's one area that has not really gotten a lot of attention in the first place. And one key thing that Kevin mentioned here, the soil itself. Because we are growing in the dry season, a lot of salt built up. You have to rejuvenate the soils. Farming practices, because the wheat comes after rice or after tomato, who are heavy miners, then you put another heavy miner on the soil again. And if it continues that way, you will end up with soils that really uncultivable. So there are so many things that require investment, including the investment in the cropping system, as you said, to change the pattern into a legume wheat cycle rather than wheat rice or wheat tomato that is the practice. So there are so many aspects from the cropping system to the agronomy itself, and at the same time the R&D in developing plant material to expand the scope, because if we have a variety that can yield, even if it is 2 tons per hectare in the rainy season, it will reduce the pressure during the dry season cultivation, because there is 10, 15 times more cultivable area during the wet season than you have in the dry season. So it's a question of pick one and invest into it, or pick a few and you can't solve it all, but everybody does his bit to make sure that at the end of the day, we get the required results. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Aliyu, for that. I think as of now, we've come to the end of the question and answer. At this juncture, I would just like to thank every speaker for tuning in. It was truly insightful to learn about the challenges and how Nigeria can potentially overcome some of these challenges. I'll be handing over to our host, CIMMYT, to do the final bidding with this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And Kevin, hope to see you soon back to Weka Wheat or any of those regional outings. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kellye.
Thank you. Welcome to Africa.
Bye. Yeah.
Will be giving us the concluding statements now. I think she's having some connection issues, but we can still be patient with that. Okay.
Okay. Hi, good well, it's evening where I am here, but good morning or good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I want to thank the team for putting this together. This was a really interesting webinar. I was rushing back here so that I could be part of it properly. I want to thank the team, like I said. I want to thank the speakers as well for sharing their insights. I want to thank for representing me. I saw the question that was asked, and I was just saying to myself, it's probably a good thing that Francis represented me, because it was a very complicated question, and he was able to give a very good answer. So I just wanted to give a bit of background as to why we got here and where we're going with all of this. At the beginning of this year, late last year, as we already focused on agribusiness, but we decided to focus on some specific areas within the agribusiness space. And the research lead at the time suggested that we focus on wheat, okay? Now, at that time, we thought it was going to be as simple as bringing a buyer with a seller or bringing an investor with an investee, only to find out that actually the production is actually the issue, and we kind of really need to go back to the roots. So I'm really glad that we're able to bring together, I guess, the scientists and the doctors to re-emphasize the importance of looking at the genetics and seeing how, we can invest more in research and development. Just like one of the fellow speakers mentioned, in essence, anything is possible providing the right research and development is being done. So that's something we want to advocate for, because if we look at the whole value chain, the market is actually there. So that's something as an organization, now that we've decided to take wheat as one of our focal areas, we want to see if we can advocate for. When we were doing the research just to see, what's going on in the wheat space, we realized that outside of Africa, or outside of Nigeria at least, so much is being done in the wheat space. So it'd be interesting, and a lot of research is being done as well with regards to wheat. So it'd be interesting to see how, Nigeria can also, advocate for more research and development. And one thing that's kind of really key, especially in our organization, is that idea of leverage. We don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Quite often we can leverage off those that have already done it and then see how we can then adapt it to the Nigerian environment. And again, that's an area that we want to be able to push because the market is there, the funding is there, but then in the case of wheat, I guess the right wheat seeds isn't there. So that's the problem. So once again, I want to thank all the speakers for participating. I want to thank the team for putting this together, and hopefully we can continue to have more of these engagements.
Yes.
I can't seem to hear you, CIMMYT. I hope I was audible.
Okay, we can hear you. We
Okay.
heard you outro. Thank you very much, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Okay. So please, you can always go to our YouTube to see the full live stream in case if you missed any part of the presentations or the webinar in total. It's always on Welcome to Africa International YouTube. The link will be posted right on the chat box for everyone to see it, and will also be shared across our social media and newsletter platforms. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. Have a wonderful evening.